Sean from Movie Assault here, and it is time for me to make another video. This time out, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I don't want to just do pickup videos, so I thought I would do every month, in addition to a pickup video, I would do a what I watched in the month of, in this case, May of 2022. I watched 10 movies this month of varying genres, and it's also kind of fun for me to go back and look at what I watched versus what I bought, because I've got this incredibly big backlog of movies I need to watch, and then I end up watching, half of these movies off of streaming services, which, I'm not super proud of, being a big fan of physical media, but in this case, I went on vacation, so I watched 3 of these movies while I was on vacation, and I obviously couldn't take my whole collection with me, so I just was at the mercy of whatever was available from streaming services. So the first film I watched while I was on vacation was a movie called Blood and Flesh: The Real Life and Ghastly Death of Al Adamson. And it's about director and writer, sometimes writer, Al Adamson, who made a lot of technically B-grade movies, but more like Z-grade movies in the 1960s and 70s mainly. And he was an exploitation filmmaker. And the documentary is about basically what the title says, the real life and ghastly death of Al Adamson, because he had this crazy career where he would make these movies for next to nothing, and he would wrangle up his friends and take advantage of whatever things they could bring to the table. So one of his films has aerial shots. I'm sure more of them do, but one film for sure has aerial shots in it because one of his friends owned a plane, and he would rent cars to do car chases with, and then return them back to the rental company all beat up. He would just make movies for as little money as possible, and try to make as much back on them as he could. And he finally hit pay dirt with a movie called Satan's Sadists, which was released in 1967, I think, 67 or 69. I'm not 100% sure. I have not seen that. And in fact, I had never seen any of Al Adamson's films prior to watching this documentary. But I did watch one of his films later in the month of May as a result of this, and I'll tell you about that. But the second half of the film the documentary is about his death. He was murdered in a very bizarre way by a contractor that he had hired to do some renovations to one of his houses, because in his later years he was into real estate. So it's really kind of a bizarre 2-part documentary. It's not really 2 parts, but it feels like it's 2 parts. It's sort of like a look into the film business, and then sort of like a Dateline episode. So it's really good. I did do a review of it on movieassault.com. You can see my more fleshed out thoughts about it on the site. Also, while I was on vacation, I watched a film called Closed for Storm, which came out in 2020. And this is a documentary about the Six Flags park outside of New Orleans that was closed as a result of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and then never reopened, and it is now completely abandoned and basically falling apart. But it's sort of, it was originally called Jazzland when it first opened, and the documentary kind of ramps up by telling you the whole story of how New Orleans didn't have a theme park, and then they got one. It was called Jazzland, and then Six Flags bought it and did some renovations, and it was starting to do okay, and then it ran into financial trouble, and then the storm hit and it never reopened. But if you're a fan of like urban explorers who will who will go into abandoned places, it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of footage of the park now that it's abandoned, and it's been abandoned for over 15 years. It's really interesting. That part is interesting. The documentary itself is not the best film. It was a great way to pass an hour and a half, but I don't think I'd ever watch it again. But it's pretty interesting and worth your time if you're into amusement parks or kind of the urban explorer thing. I then watched, the last movie I watched while I was on vacation was The Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas, as it was known in the United States, and it was known as The Abominable Snowman in 1957 when it was released in the UK. It is a Hammer Films production starring Forrest Tucker and Peter Cushing, and basically it's about an expedition to find and bring back the abominable snowman. Well, Peter Cushing is a botanist, I believe, and he and this American explorer, played by Forrest Tucker, who's basically a, your stereotypical gung-ho dumbass American, wants to hunt it while and kill it, or bring it back alive. He actually wants to bring it back alive, but he's not against killing one and bringing it back. It's just a fun movie. It's not really so much of a horror movie. There are some creepy parts to it, but it's a really well-made film. It's a little bit of a slow burn, and you don't really see much of the abominable snowman in it. But Peter Cushing is excellent as always, and Forrest Tucker, for his part, he's really good too. It's an early example of a Hammer film, and I quite enjoyed it. Next up, I watched The Female Bunch from 1971, and that is the movie I was talking about earlier from Al Adamson. I kind of wanted to see what one of his movies were like from beginning to end, and based on the title of the documentary, Blood and Flesh, that's kind of what this was. It was half exploitation film, sort of playing on the Wild Bunch, which was popular back then. And it's a group of women who they live near the Mexican border, the United States-Mexican border, and they run heroin across the border. And they hate men. They live on a ranch, and no men are allowed. And this woman, I think her name is Sandy, she commits suicide after she's dumped in Las Vegas by her boyfriend. And her co-worker is a member of this gang and tries to recruit her, and it kind of shows how she's initiated into this gang, and then they go across the border, and basically it turns into a softcore, pretty poorly filmed softcore porn movie for 10 to 15 minutes, and then it's back to all the men-hating action. It's entertaining. I probably cut it a lot more slack than I would have, knowing some of the behind-the-scenes information about how it was made. And Russ Tamblin's in it. He was in West Side Story, and then he's in this. I believe that this was filmed in 1969, but it wasn't released until 1971. And it was made for some ridiculously low amount of money, and it looks like it. The editing is terrible. Lon Chaney Jr. is in it, and it was actually his last film. And he looks beyond terrible in it. You can barely hear him because he had throat cancer, I believe. He's really bloated. He's guzzling vodka literally on camera, and he was suffering from alcoholism at the time. So it's just kind of a sad way to see him go out. But I actually thought the movie was entertaining for what it was. And like I said, I probably cut it more slack than it deserves after watching the Al Adamson documentary. But I've got a full review of that one on movieassault.com if you want to check it out. Then I went to the theater to see Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, the latest MCU film. And this one was directed by Sam Raimi. I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I might. This multiverse thing that kind of started with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, what was that, 2018? I think 2018, 2017. Because of the pandemic, I've lost track of what year it is. So I don't know how long anything was or how long ago something came out. But, you've got this multiverse idea where, basically it's an excuse for different characters or different versions of the same character to come at each other or meet each other or whatever. But you've got Doctor Strange dealing with the multiverse, and there's a woman named America Vasquez, I believe is her name. She actually can physically transfer herself from one universe to the other. And if this, I don't want to spoil the villain, but it's not really spoiling it because it's probably in the trailer if you pay attention. But a villain wants to take that power from her for a particular reason. And if that were to happen, then it is possible that these multiverses could collide and destroy each other. And then, of course, life as we know it would cease to exist, and all that kind of apocalyptic stuff from a comic book movie. But being that they could go to anywhere, any multiverse, any universe, they probably picked the most boring ones to go to. So it's not that exciting of a movie. It's not as entertaining as, say, Spider-Man No Way Home, which also dealt with the multiverse. And I think coming on the heels of Spider-Man No Way Home, it's kind of disappointing. It's still entertaining. It's still a good movie. The MCU doesn't make terrible movies. My least favorite MCU movie was The Eternals, or Eternals, and this is better than that. But even that wasn't that bad of a movie. So then I watched Top Gun with my wife because she really wanted to see Top Gun Maverick, and it had been like eons since I had seen the original Top Gun, so I figured we'd watch it together, and we did. And before we sat down and watched it, I really had a negative opinion of Top Gun. I just did not like it the last time I watched it, and I actually was talking to my wife about it after we watched it, the first film again, and I think it was because I watched it as part of a film class, and the teacher, after we watched it, just dissected it and obliterated it for being a Navy recruitment film, and it had all these ridiculous things like that couldn't possibly happen in real life. Like the enemy pilots always wore their masks because they were supposed to be the faceless enemy, but of course at the same altitude you've got Tom Cruise and his gang of pilots not wearing a mask because, you know, you want to see their face because they're the good guy and all this stuff. So the teacher kind of painted it in a negative light, and I think I just over time just sort of assumed that attitude about it. And I didn't have any interest in watching it again, but my wife was super enthusiastic about watching it, and I figured, all right, I'll watch it. And without any pretense, without any, you know, I kept an open mind, and I actually enjoyed it. Is it a great movie? No, but it's fun, it's stupid, it's silly, and it was fun, and so I enjoyed it. So we watched that, and then we did end up watching Top Gun Maverick, which I liked just a little bit more than the original because it was, I don't want to say it was more realistic, but it had more of a story to it. And I thought the flying sequences were a lot more thrilling. The acting was a little bit better, but there's, I don't know how many shot for shot callbacks there are to the original film. That got a little old after a while, but it was interesting to see. I probably wouldn't have noticed it as much had I not watched the original like right before I watched the sequel. But it's entertaining, and it seemed to be audience pleasing, and you know, like the first one, it's silly, it's stupid, but it's fun, and that's what it's supposed to be. Then I watched Man of a Thousand Faces from 1957, starring James Cagney, starring as Lon Chaney Sr., and this is sort of a fictional or a heavily fictionalized version of his biography that spends a lot of time on, spends a lot of time on this melodramatic first marriage that he had, which may or may not be truthful, but it seemed to spend, I think the movie was an hour and 50 minutes, I believe, and it seemed to spend like 90% of the time talking about this first marriage or the fallout from this first marriage, and it kind of glossed over what he's more famous for, which, you know, is his makeup talent, and that it mentions all that stuff, but it's not, it didn't sort of tickle my fancy in terms of what I wanted to learn about Lon Chaney. But asking a 1957 mainstream theatrical movie to tell you know, sort of a nerdy horror story type, not horror story, but, you know, more technical based or technically based story probably isn't going to happen. So I don't know why I was expecting that from it, but it was entertaining. The makeup that they did to show James Cagney as Lon Chaney, as like the Phantom of the Opera and the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and the Penalty. I think they showed the Penalty, and some of the other get-ups that he invented over the course of his film career were pretty interesting. They didn't look a lot like what Lon Chaney wore, but it was close enough that you couldn't really tell it was James Cagney wearing it. So it was interesting. It's not a great movie, but it's worth watching if you're interested in Lon Chaney. And then I watched a movie called Shark Bait from 2022. It's a direct-to-video release that I think is on pay-per-view. I think I watched it on Prime Video. But it's, you know, it's a shark flick. It's very much in the same vein as Great White from last summer. Basically, you've got a bunch of people stranded, this time on jet skis out in the middle of the ocean, and lo and behold, a great white shark begins circling and picking them off one by one. It's not bad. The special effects are surprisingly good. It's a little bit gory, but not terrible. I mean, if you're not into that kind of thing, I don't know why you'd be watching a shark movie anyway. But the shark stuff, the shark effects are pretty cool. There's some CGI and some stock footage, and the way they blend that into the other footage is pretty well done. I read a review that somebody said that there was one shot that looked worse than a sci-fi film. I must have closed my eyes during that scene because I didn't see it. But if you like shark movies, Shark Bait is not terrible. Great White, if you like Great White, it's just about as good as that. I think the special effects are a little bit better in Shark Bait than they are in Great White, but your mileage may vary. If you're looking for a Sharknado type film, this is not it. This is much more realistic, still borderline, ridiculous in terms of the way the shark behaves, because sharks don't actually hunt people. But I don't know. It was interesting. And then last but not least, last night I watched Rubber from 2010, and this is a movie about a killer tire. At least that's what you'd think based on the cover art, and all that anybody talks about this movie is that it's about a killer tire. It's a tire that goes around and makes people's heads explode. But it's actually more than that. It's I don't want to give too much of it away, but it's actually about, well, the beginning of the film, a character breaks the fourth wall immediately and goes on this monologue about films, things that happen in films for no reason, kind of set the expectation that there's things in this movie are going to happen for no reason. So the tire becomes sentient and alive and rolls around and kills people for no reason. But then there is a scene where a man hands out binoculars to a group of spectators, and they begin watching the events of the film, and they call it the film. So it's like they're watching the same movie you're watching. And then the film sort of goes into sort of a subtle, maybe not so subtle commentary on the relationship between the audience and films, and reality versus fantasy, and things happening for no reason. And it's an entertaining film, but even at a little bit over 80 minutes, it just feels a little bit too long, because the script tries to be a little more clever than it should be. It kind of trips over itself trying to be clever. I appreciated it for what it was trying to do. It was kind of an absurdist horror comedy, but it got a little old pretty quick, just because it kept trying to remind you how clever it was. But there was some interesting performances in it. There's a man, I believe his name is Jack Plotnick. He plays a character called the Accountant. He's very entertaining. Wings Hauser, if you're familiar with him, he was in a lot of 80s movies, including the movie Vice Squad. He's in it. He plays a man in a wheelchair. It's literally how he's credited in the credits, as man in wheelchair. He's pretty good. He's probably the smartest character in the whole movie. But it's entertaining. It's more entertaining to probably talk about and dissect than it is to watch, because I think on a second viewing there'd be a lot more, I'd be a lot more able to pick out kind of what the director was trying to do, the writer-director, and I can't remember his name. It's I watched some of the special features on the DVD, and it was obvious that his name is spelled Quentin, but somebody pronounced it Quentin, and he's French. And his last name, I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but it's Dupois, maybe? Am I close? I have no idea. But anyway, Rubber is an okay movie that probably spends more time trying to be clever than being clever. But I'm glad I watched it finally, because you can never have enough movies about killer tires in your library. So there you go. That is what I watched in the month of May. Let me know what you think about this type of format. Is there anything I should talk about or not talk about when I'm talking about these movies I watched? Did I go into too much detail, not enough detail? You let me know. I don't know. We'll see, and then I'll take your feedback and apply it for what I watched in the month of June 2022. As always, thanks for watching to the end of the video. If you did, I appreciate it. I appreciate you. Thanks for subscribing. And if you haven't done so already, please click the subscribe button below and hit that thumbs up because that really helps me out. So thanks for watching, everybody. Take it easy.